Hi everyone, welcome to the December 23rd edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski, and we're back from a little bit of a hiatus. We took a little bit of a freshening during the early part of December, but we're back ready to begin a regular sequence of podcasts coming into the new year. But before we get into 2023, we thought we would drop a little holiday present as we look ahead to Santa Anita's opening day on December 26th. That is the focus of this podcast, and we will be taking a look at their Pick 6 sequence, which begins in Race 6, going all the way through Race 11. Craig and I, neither of us are really big Pick 6 players, especially not the jackpot style that they have at Santa Anita, but we wanted to talk about all of these races because it does comprise 4 of the stakes races they are running on that Saturday card at Santa Anita, beginning with the San Antonio. The Pick 5, the 50-cent Pick 5, which is a regular wager, does begin in Race 7, so if you prefer that kind of play, we'll be going through all of that sequence as well. And Craig, it's good to get back into the swing of things and talk about these races on the forecast.
It is. It's something I didn't mind the break at all. And you mentioned you called it a freshening. I would say that's perfect because I'm pretty excited about doing this. I've actually not placed very many bets at all since the Breeders' Cup. Maybe just a couple here and there on the races we've done video previews for. But for the most part, I've taken a break. But I'm ready to get back into it. And I think this is a really exciting card.
For sure. The feature race is the Grade 1 Malibu. Maybe that's not the most interesting wagering affair. We'll get to that in just a little bit because there is going to be a heavy favorite in there. But all of the other races in this sequence, I think you can make cases for multiple horses. Even this first leg of the Pick 6 that we're going to talk about, I think there might be a somewhat vulnerable favorite in there. But we're going to get into all of that in just a little bit. The races in this sequence, I should mention, are the San Antonio and then 3 Grade 1s, the La Brea, the Malibu, and closing things out the last race of the day with the Grade 1 American Oaks on the turf for the 3-year-old fillies. So we're going to dive through and discuss all of these races, and we'll, as we usually do at this forecast, by the end, we'll talk about how we might attack these sequences, whichever ones we think are appealing from a wagering standpoint, a little bit of ticket structure discussion, but we'll get to that towards the end. Craig, let's dive into the handicapping with that Grade 2 San Antonio, the 6th race right in the middle of this card, and just a 6-horse field. Bob Baffert has half of the field here, as is also the case in the La Brea. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But he does have 3 runners in here. Clearly, though, the heavy favorite among them is the number 6 Country Grammar. However, maybe this is not the ultimate goal for him because it does feel like this is just a prep race for some of his winter targets, probably overseas.
It does. He was a horse who obviously didn't show up in the Breeders' Cup. We didn't see him run that day. And you have to wonder if this is a good distance for him. He's run okay at a mile and a 16th before, but just watching his races, he always seems like a horse who the more distance, the better it's going to be for him. And as you said, particularly when you consider maybe this one could be a prep race, I think he's one that I'd be taking a shot against, particularly since I'm not playing a Pick 6. This race will be played in isolation for me, so I'm going to try to beat him personally.
Yeah, he was clearly in great form earlier this year when he won the Dubai World Cup. That was a pretty good field, even in retrospect, beating horses like Hot Rod Charlie and Life is Good. But like you were saying, he got the 10 furlongs that day, and it does feel like that really is his optimum distance. Hasn't been quite the same, I guess you could say, since coming back from that trip to the Middle East last year. He's finished second 3 times. Obviously, you're not going to hold the loss to Flightline at the Pacific Classic against him, but his 2 runner-up finishes surrounding that, arguably not the best races that we've seen from Country Grammar. Both of those were going shorter than a mile and a quarter. So I do have some questions about the form that he's in right now and whether he's going to run his best race off the layoff going this mile and a 16th trip. And Craig, I think the issue in this race is finding the right alternative for him, because if you're playing a pick sequence, you probably don't want to spread in this race, so you're trying to narrow things down a little bit. And personally, for me, I'd be most interested in the number 2 Stiletto Boy. He also has some questions to answer about the form that he's in, because he didn't really look like himself over the summer at Del Mar, but he has run his best races at Santa Anita in the past, so maybe getting back to this track is going to agree with him. And also, Also, I don't want to be too hard on him for that Pacific Classic. I mean, everybody was beaten to city block by Flightline that day, so, I mean, not a big surprise that he finished far back in there. He's coming off a bit of a layoff here. I think he's better suited to the mile and the 16th than Country Grammar, and he also has superior tactical speed, so I'm hoping that he can just get the jump on that foe.
I can see the argument for Stiletto Boy. You know I'm a fan of his horse. We've been talking about him for a long time because he was certainly showing up, running in all the big races out in California. He, after kind of humble beginnings at Prairie Meadows, Oaklawn, where he did very well there. But my one concern about him is he only wins when he makes the front. And if I knew Mike Smith was going to give him an aggressive ride, I'd probably be a little more fan of him. He's one I'd be using if I was playing a pick six because I do think it's possible. It's not like there's a ton of speed in here. But I'm going to go in a little bit different direction. I'm just kind of tired of all these same horses that we've seen. I wonder about a horse who's the second choice on the morning line, Haywood's Beach, who we talked about the distance for Country Grammar. I'm not sure how this fits for him, a horse who's done his best running at 1.5 miles or longer. So I'm going to go to the inside horse in Hopkins. He's lacking a little bit in the speed figures of recent times, but he's won his last 2 races. One of those was with a pretty slow pace. He hasn't had a lot of pace to run into in any of them. And he seems like a horse to me who, even though he hasn't tried the 2 turns yet, I think he's really going to like it, and I think he may find himself on the front end.
Yeah, I kind of had the opposite take on him. I was wondering why these 2 Baffert horses were in here because Hopkins has been campaigned as more of a sprinter so far, and Hudson Ridge, I mean, he's been running in primarily turf races for all of his career. I mean, I guess you could make some minor excuses for his 2 prior dirt performances, but they don't really put him in the mix here. And I was wondering if Baffert just ran these 2 horses to kind of help fill out the field for Country Grammar because it looked like it was coming up with, a pretty small bunch, maybe 4 runners, and, running these horses, Baffert certainly has a large bench to pull from if he wants to fill out a field in Southern California. And I was wondering if maybe that's more the reason why these 2 horses are in here. To me, I had the opposite take on Hopkins. Physically, he looks like this big, rounded, burly horse that's all sprinter build. The dam side is just pure speed. It's sprint pedigree. He is by Quality Road, but I have real reservations about this horse going longer, and like you were saying, his recent speed figures, they've just never measured up to that huge number that he ran exactly 1 year ago on debut on opening day last year at Santa Anita, and that's a race that maybe hasn't stood up to scrutiny as far as the top 2 finishers go. Both he and Shaz, the stablemate who beat him, they just never really ran back to that huge number that they got, so I have some problems with Hopkins. I mean, maybe he's going to be one of the bigger prices in this race. So, I mean, I don't want to talk anybody off him if he's in the 8 to 10 to 1 range, but he just wasn't for me in here, and that's the problem with this race. I don't love Stiletto Boy, but I just couldn't find anywhere else to go.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I'm glad we don't have to play it as part of the pick 5, to be honest.
Yeah.
You didn't touch on Haywood's Beach. Are you like me? Do you think it's just way too short for him?
Yeah, I mean, among the 2 John Sadler trainees, I actually would prefer the up-and-comer Breakfast Ride, the 3-year-old, who just seems like he's been in good form recently. His best races have come at Del Mar, but he seems like the kind of horse that might be stepping forward at the right time, and if a horse like Stiletto Boy does not recapture his best form, or if Country Grammar needs a race off the layoff and this is too short, maybe Breakfast Ride's speed figures in the mid-1 teens would be good enough. So, I mean, if a horse is going to, pull an upset here, I was more looking at a runner like him as opposed to one of the Baffert trainees. Let's move on to the next leg of this sequence, or the first leg of the Pick 5 sequence, if that is your preference, as I think it would be for both Craig and I. 50-cent Pick 5 wager. It begins in race 7. This is a downhill turf sprint for the California breds for the N1X allowance condition, and we've got a pretty large field here, Craig, of fillies and mares. Tough one to really narrow down because it just seems pretty wide open on paper. It's hard to even know where to start. I guess guess a horse like the number 8 Big Beauty is supposed to take money in here because she's hit the board multiple times at this level. She's got pretty consistent, solid speed figures, and she's getting a rider switch to Flavien Prat. So a lot of arrows pointing in her direction, but that also means that she's going to take a lot of money.
Yeah, you kind of summed up exactly how I looked at this race. That's the horse I landed on first as maybe the most likely winner, and a big part of that's because of Flavien Prat, who just rides so well. He rides great down the hill, rides great on the Santa Anita turf. Big Beauty has the speed figures, gets a good post. I do prefer the outside post positions going down the hill, but it's not like I want to hand her the race. I do think there's some other alternatives in here. A couple of them, I'm not sure how to pronounce the 9. I should have listened to my buddy Larry Comus's call because I'm sure he probably had it down, but it's a French name. We'll leave it at that. I think she's got a shot in here. She's Doug O'Neill trainee, similarly has nice speed figures. The one difference with her is she hasn't really got a chance to run down the hill. She's ran the mile before. She's ran the one-turn sprints, but she just kind of seems like neither one of them really suits her. She's kind of caught in between. She's not the true sprinter. She tends to get tired when she tries a mile that last furlong or so. So if I had to make a top pick in here, it would be her. The other horse I wanted to mention was the 5-horse Lady Marianne. She just looks like the speed horse who, in a race without a lot of speed, we have the 2 and the 5, the 2 Smiling Molly on the pace projector shown on the front with Lady Marianne right to her outside on her flank. She seems the one more likely to handle the 6.5 furlongs. She's tried turf. Ran okay on it at just 5 furlongs. I think she'd appreciate the extra distance more than the 2 Smiling Molly, who has tried the hill without success and just seems like more of a 5 furlong specialist to me.
Craig, forgive me. Your connection cut out on me for just a second as I think you were talking about the pronunciation of a horse, and I heard the rest, so I think you were talking about the number 9. I'm just assuming I missed you saying the name. Maybe that's for the best. I don't know. But yeah, I agree. I mean, Doug O'Neill has 2 runners in here, and they both make some sense on form. I'll try Le Deuxième Etoile, I think is how the announcer said it last time. She has improved in her last couple of starts. I don't know what to make of her because her form prior to that against maidens really didn't put her at this level, but maybe she's a 3-year-old that's just kind of putting it all together towards the end of the season. I was kind of a little bit iffy on her. I could go back and forth. And the other O'Neill, or I should say the other Redham horse, it's not Doug O'Neill, he's trained by Ben Cecil, the number 7 Eleuthera. She's another one who's got some solid class lines over the past year or so, but she's done it going further, so I question this turn back in distance, and she's also coming off a layoff. I wonder if maybe this is just more of a prep for her. So I was a little bit iffy on both of those Redham runners, and I'm glad you brought up the number 5, Lady Marianne, because I think she's an interesting horse that could go off at a price here. Clearly, this is a trainer that doesn't do a lot of winning in Southern California, pretty low ROI over the past 5 years, but I think that's going to be built into her price when you're taking a horse like this. And both of her turf sprints, when you go back and watch them, she's run better than it might seem. She got wide trips on each occasion, just didn't really have a chance to achieve her best results. She probably should have won that race 3 back, and in her surrounding dirt races, she's shown a bit more speed, and I wouldn't be surprised if she's forwardly ridden here, going back to that more aggressive running style with the rider switch to a new pilot. So I think she's pretty interesting if maybe this pace does not heat up that much on the front end, which the pace projector suggests it probably won't, because there isn't a whole lot of speed signed on here, and I see that favors on or near the lead designation. So maybe horses that are trying to close from a little farther back could be somewhat compromised. That could work against the likely favorite Big Beauty, who is more of a closer. I was interested in the number 11, True Patriot. She's another one who's going to need some pace to close into. We'll see how much of that develops here, but I just thought she had a little more upside than a lot of runners in this field. They tried the mile last time, and she didn't break that well and just got a little bit too far back in the early portion of that race. She was running on best of all at the end, but was just left with too much to do. It's tough to make up that much ground in the stretch at Del Mar. I liked her sprint 2 back, and I just feel like she's moving in the right direction, is not going to be favored, but she should be a fair price in the 5 to 6 to 1 range. So she's one that I would want to lean on a little bit here, but this is a race where I think you have to consider spreading a little because there are just so many ways ways to go. I mean, I don't think we even mentioned the number 1 horse, Flame Magoon, who seems to be in great form coming into this. Maybe a rider that's going to have to work hard to achieve the right trip from the rail draw, which often isn't ideal going down the hill, but she's got form that puts her in the mix. So many ways to go in this race.
Yeah, I have no problem with True Patriot at all. She is another who has yet to get a chance to try the hill. She's done pretty well at the extended sprint distances, not quite as well at the mile. Yeah, she broke her maiden at the mile, but with a pretty weak speed figure. I do think she's set up pretty well. She should handle this down the hill turf course pretty well, particularly from that outside draw. Give her time to wind up and make that big run.
Move on to the next race in this sequence, back to the stakes portion. The first grade 1 on this card, the La Brea Stakes for the 3-year-old fillies, going 7 furlongs. And as with the Santa Antonio, Bob Baffert is sending out half of the runners in this 8-horse field. He's got a quartet of 3-year-old fillies, and it's not like any of them don't belong in this race. They all make some sense in here, so you have to separate the Baffert runners in addition to handicapping the race as a whole. Perhaps that makes things more difficult for some people. Among the Baffert horses, I would say that the number 4, Midnight Memories, is the one that's probably coming in with the best form. She's won 4 of her 5 lifetime starts, really seemed to take a step forward in the fall this year, winning the Torrey Pines and then Zenyatta, but both of those were 2-turn races, so she's going to have to negotiate the turn back in distance here. What will help her cause, though, Craig, is that it does seem like there's plenty of pace in here to set up her late run if she does indeed have to come from off the pace.
There does seem to be plenty up front. We have Hot Pepper shown on a pretty clear lead, and despite that clear lead, we get the fast-paced designation on the pace projector because there does figure to be several other horses in there chasing her as much as they can. I'm not sure about Hot Peppers, what to do with her. It just I didn't look it up on Formulator. I will before Saturday, but Rudy Rodriguez is not a barn that ships very often. I mean, you can probably count on one hand the number of times that he's shipped out west, if you even need a hand for it. So I have my questions about her. She's coming off a layoff after a disappointing effort in the prior S, where she just really didn't have an excuse, ran a not good 4th after putting together a string of good races earlier in the summer. So I'm kind of lukewarm on Hot Pepper. She's a horse who maybe if she gets left alone, you could use her. I'm going to use her in the pick 5 just more as one that I'd be afraid that she could just get loose, but I'm not overly confident on her. The Baffert horses, I actually am leaning a little towards the 3-horse, Ganadora. She's one who the 2 times she's been in the Baffert barn, she's had absolute romps. She didn't run quite as well during Bob's suspension when she was in another barn, even though she did win one of those. Her speed figures actually fit in this field. She's been off for a while now since the Los Al fall meet, but comes back. She's working up a storm, and I just have a feeling that of those Baffert, of the quartet, that she is the most talented of them and the one most likely to have a big breakout race here.
Yeah, I mean, I'll touch upon Hot Peppers first. I did jot down some stats for Rudy Rodriguez. Running on the Naira circuit, his ROI is $1.68 over the past 5 years. At all other circuits, Rudy's ROI is $1.32. And he's just had one starter in Southern California over the past 5 years, and that was Bella Sofia in the Breeders' Cup. And of course, she was off the board as one of the favorites in there. So I agree. It's hard to trust Hot Peppers to run her top race shipping out here. I guess some people might view it as a sign of confidence for the connections because there were spots to run her back east. I think she was even entered in the, I want to say maybe the Garland of Roses at Aqueduct a few weeks ago, but they decided to run here instead. So some interesting things going on with her, but even at her best, I think Hot Peppers is going to be hard-pressed to get 7 furlongs with pace pressure, so I wanted to veer away from her, and the focus really is on the Bob Baffert horses. I don't totally agree with your take on Ganadora. I'm not sure that I view her as the best of the Baffert runners. She has been impressive in her the victories that bookend her career, like you were pointing out, but she really wasn't beating much of a field at Los Al last time. That was going the mile. She just kind of got loose on the front end. It wasn't a very competitive race. I don't really want to put too much stock in that effort. When she's been in tougher races, she hasn't put her best foot forward, so I'm not sure what I make of her, and I feel like she's the one that is going to be most apt to go after Hot Peppers on the front end, so I wonder if she's going to have the toughest trip coming to her. I had trouble warming up to her of the Baffert runners. I do think Midnight Memories is the horse to beat. I don't really mind the turn back to 7 furlongs. To me, she's just really logical in here, but I also think she's going to be the favorite. From a value standpoint, the Baffert horse that I would want the most is the number 1, Under the Stars. She's had more chances than the rest, but I think if you kind of parse her form, when she's run poorly, you can make legitimate excuses. She clearly has some gait issues, but I mean, she's broken better some days than others, and the 2 disastrous starts that she had were in the Santa Anita Oaks and in the Torrey Pines 2-back, and clearly those are 2 of the worst efforts of her career. I'm willing to forgive those because she broke so badly on those days and was just out of position for the entire race thereafter. But her when she breaks well, she runs competitive speed figures pretty consistently, and she's run well against other horses in this field. I thought that she put in a good effort behind Cece last time in that Chillingworth. They've tried to stretch her out on a few occasions, but I really do think that she's more of the 6.5 to 7 furlong specialist. So I like this distance for her, and she's not one that needs to be right on the lead. So I think even though she's breaking from the rail here, she's going to get the right kind of stalking trip. And I was watching some of her recent workouts, and she has been the workmate of Taba in the morning, and arguably he's been going just a little bit better than her under his typical encouragement, but she's held her own against that very good 3-year-old colt, and I think she's coming into this race in pretty good form. So Under the Stars is the one that I would want to lean on the most. Craig, among the non-Bafferts, do you agree that maybe the number 8, Awake at Midnight, could be the biggest danger? Because she's another that I think is a little bit dirtied up by some route tries and could appreciate this turn back in distance.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, she's run well against a couple of the Bob Baffert horses in here. She beat Fun to Dream about 3 starts back. She ran a decent second to Midnight Memory. So of the others, I guess she's the one that you would have to give a shot to. It's just a matter of how much do you want to spread in this race, and that's going to come down to ticket structure.
Yeah, the Baffert horse I don't really want at all is Fun to Dream, the California bred. Not that she's run poorly. I mean, she's won 4 of her 5 starts. I just feel like she was really second best to Awake at Midnight when they met at Del Mar, and since then she's faced slightly weaker competition, so she wasn't really for me in this field, but I did like Under the Stars and Midnight Memories. Let's move on to race 9. This is back into allowance competition. This one for open allowance runners. The N1X condition going a mile and an eighth on the turf course, and another big field of fillies and mares here. Pretty competitive race. This one I'm not quite sure who's going to be the favorite. I guess I could see the public coalescing around a horse like the number 3 Ballet Dancing, and I do think that could be the right way to go because I kind of do view her as the horse to beat in here. I know that she comes off and off the board finish at this level when she was favored, but if you go back and watch that race, she never had a chance. I mean, the pace was slow, she was stuck in traffic at the top of the stretch, didn't get free until it was way too late, and she was actually finishing best of all when she finally got into the clear. I think Ballet Dancing might be the most talented horse in this race, but she's a deep closer who's going to have to work out a trip.
She is. I saw the same trip you did. I do think she's a strong contender in here. At first glance, I thought this might be a race that I wanted to spread because it just looks open at first glance. But the more I dug, I think there's a lot of filler in here. Horses who just don't win, don't really have a good turn of foot. So I'm going to narrow it down a little bit. I'll start with, you started with Ballet Dancing. She would definitely be on my tickets. The one horse who kind of caught my eye was the 6 horse Bataya for Graham Motion, who shipped in last time from Del Mar. I'm not sure what kind of path she took that she was scratched at Woodbine. Don't know if she actually made it there. But she was a horse who had spent her entire career on the East Coast. And when she shipped out west, I thought she had a little bit of a troubled trip last time. She drew a bad wide post. She wound up getting shuffled back to last. I don't think it was just that she doesn't have any speed. And trying to work out an inside trip just didn't work out. She was finishing off the race. So she's one I'm going to lean on in here because I really want to give her a second chance against what I think's a little bit lesser competition out in Southern California.
Yeah, I really wanted to like her, and because I remember her debut going all the way back to 2020 when she was a 2-year-old at Belmont. She was visually impressive that day. That race didn't turn out to be that strong, and she just never really took a step forward after that. And now they've tried to restart her career a few times, and now she's in Southern California. Watching that last race, I agree she had some trouble early on. I thought she got a pretty good trip thereafter, and just like has been the case in so many of her races, just lacked any turn of foot. She's just kind of one of these deep closers who takes a long time to wind up, and that style can often be problematic in Southern California when there's not a whole lot of stretch to work with, and you need a little bit of turn of foot on the turf to be effective from off the pace. So I'm a little bit concerned about her maybe being more compromised by pace even than ballet dancing, who we just talked about. And she's the kind of horse I'd want a price on, and I'm not sure she's going to be that big a price in this race. And when I watched that last race at Del Mar, I was equally as interested in the horse that finished right alongside her at the wire, the number 8 Almost a Factor, who actually nosed her out for 4th. And Almost a Factor got a very similar trip, saved a little more ground because she was one path inside of Battaglia for most of the race, but she does have better tactical speed that she's shown in the past. Going back to her race 2 back, Almost a Factor was 3 wide around both turns in a race where that probably wasn't the ideal trip. It kind of was falling apart a little bit at the end, and I thought she ran pretty well to hang on for 4th that day, and I feel like overall, her form's a little bit stronger than that of Battaglia, and I think she's going to be a bigger price in this race. So I wanted to go more towards her. I actually do think the biggest threat to ballet dancing, though, is the horse that's drawn all the way on the outside, the number 12 Karakatsi. And, tough post position. She's also a horse that hasn't shown much affinity for winning lately. She won her career debut and has subsequently lost 11 races in a row, but she's run pretty well in some tougher spots. I mean, 2 back, she was in against Going Global. What chance did she have in that race? And she actually stayed on pretty well for 3rd after stalking outside the entire way. And then last time, again, her rider, Joe Bravo, just made no attempt to save ground at any point in the race. She was hung out 3 wide, uncovered, actually, stayed on pretty well to be 4th in there. I think her form is a little better than it might look on paper, and she's getting what I term to be a pretty big rider switch to Joel Rosario, who I think is going to get a little more creative trying to save ground from this outside post that maybe the rider who was on her previously would have. So I think on form, she's every bit the equal of a horse like ballet dancing, and given her career record, maybe she's going to get dismissed at a slightly bigger price.
I took a long look at her because she is the top pick on the TimeformUS Power Picks, and as you can mention, that's something we're working on behind the scenes to kind of try to improve those algorithms. And I was trying to figure out why she was picked, and I get it. I just couldn't get past the 12 or 11 losses in a row, the bad post. She just seems like the kind of horse to me that's going to find a way to lose the race. Maybe Joel Rosario will make a big difference. He certainly is an upgrade. But I'm with you. If I had to pick a 3rd horse in here, I had down the 8 Almost a Factor more than the 12. Obviously, we won't have the odds before this race when you're playing the pick 5. But I think this would be a really interesting race to play vertically or just as an individual race. But one you'd have to see the odds because it was a really tough race, I would imagine, make a morning line for. And I'm not all that confident we're going to get the prices that we see.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I'm hoping that people veer away from Karakatsia a little bit because of that post position. I mean, if you go back in her PP, she's a horse that has run really well against way better horses than this. I mean, when she was in her previous barn, I mean, she ran against Technical Analysis. She was competitive with Madone in the San Clemente. Before that, she was second to Cone Lima when she was at Gulfstream. I mean, she's faced some really good horses, and I would argue that based on her races and speed figures since the trainer switch to George Papadromu, she might actually be in the best form of her career right now. So we might just have a disagreement on her, but I think she's pretty live in this race. And like you were saying, as I went through this field, I was kind of, initially thinking along the same lines as you, that it looked wide open, but I just kept crossing off horses one by one and narrowing it down and narrowing it down. And this is a race that I don't think I want to spread in that much, because I think that the list of horses that can actually win, that have the quality to win, isn't that long.
Yeah, and just to be clear, our only real disagreement is I'm not sure she's really going to be much of a price because of all the things you pointed out, just the class factor, some of the running lines and the horses she's been in against. If I thought I was going to get the 5-1, if I could better flat bet, fixed odds, I would take it right now. I question if we will, and unfortunately we won't know for the pick 5. So it's one you're going to have to decide, do you think you're going to get that price or not?
Yeah, one horse I do want to mention, because she's coming in off a pretty big TimeformUS speed figure. I think maybe the biggest TimeformUS speed figure last out number in the field is the number 10, Leisure Wear. I know we didn't really talk about her. She does have plenty of speed, and there's not a ton of that in this race, so maybe she gets the right trip. I'm just viewing her last race with quite a bit of skepticism. That was a race where the rails were way out at Del Mar. It was just dominated on the front end. It was an unusually weak maiden field, and she beat a horse that was odds on, who I think has finished second in 5 of her 6 starts. I mean, she's the kind of horse that they could probably drop in for a tag and she would still finish second. She just seems to have a lot of hang in her. So I'm a little skeptical of Leisure Wear, and she is one that off that last speed figure I could see taking a little bit of money in here.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that speed figure is an aberrant one due to the course she ran on that day. Just say the rails were out. Seemed to be favoring speed. It's not like she was a lately race maiden coming in. I mean, it was her 13th start to get there. So I just don't think it was a sudden burst of improvement that led to that more than the condition she ran under.
Let's proceed on to the feature race on this opening day card at Santa Anita, the Grade 1 Malibu, going the 7 furlong distance for the 3-year-olds. And Craig, we've got a pretty good horse in here in the number 6 Tabo, who is going to be what I expect to be a very short price as the favorite for Bob Baffert. And it's just really hard to knock his form. I mean, you can give him the excuse of inexperience in the Kentucky Derby, but all 5 of his other races are excellent. I mean, he came out of the gate in his debut like a horse with serious talent, and he's run up to that level or surpassed it in every start since then, with the lone exception of the Derby. And I mean, I can't even fault his Breeders' Cup Classic, because I mean, he was facing a generational talent in Flightline, and I mean, he was closing pretty well through the stretch of that race to just miss second from the also talented Olympiad. So I mean, he just seems like he's a class above these from a talent standpoint.
I guess if there's a concern about him, it would be the big turn back in distance from 1.25 miles all the way back 3 furlongs to 7 furlongs. It doesn't really concern me. I think he'll be fine. I think he's much the best horse in here. And if I'm playing the pick 5, I wanted to be clever when I started out, but I couldn't come up with a horse that I could actually make a case for beating him. I just don't see it. He gets plenty of pace to close into. You've mentioned before how he works and how he has to be ridden in his races. I think a sprint race might actually be fine for him because he's going to be under encouragement from the start. He obviously ran fine in a sprint in his debut where he really finished off the race, ran a huge speed figure. So I'm not going to view the 7 furlongs as a negative. I think he's going to be fine. So for this one, I'm just going to single him and move on. I will play some vertical plays, but I'll get back to that after your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm not trying to beat this horse in the pick 5 sequence. He seems like a pretty strong lean. Don't love defaulting to obvious favorites, but he just seems like the one that a horse that you rightly can lean on because he just is such a standout on form. And I agree, I'm not really concerned about the 7 furlongs. I mean, clearly he ran an extremely fast race going 6 furlongs in his career debut, and he's shown the ability, especially in recent starts, to settle better behind horses, come from off the pace. We saw him kind of, do that better in the Pennsylvania Derby than he did in the Haskell, and then again in the Breeders' Cup, they took him much farther off the pace than he'd ever been before, and he was finishing well at the end, arguably finishing best of anybody. So I think that he's going to get the right kind of trip, and there is a ton of speed in this race, Craig. I mean, you've got bookending the field, Forbidden Kingdom and Straight No Chaser. They are both extremely fast horses who figure to hook up on the front end, so if they come back, it does feel like Taiba is the one who's going to have the stamina to pick them up in the stretch.
Right, and it's, as you mentioned, it's not like he doesn't have any tactical speed, so it's a race I'm looking forward to for verticals because there's a couple of the shorter prices on the morning line that I don't want any parts of. The second choice is Forbidden Kingdom. I don't think he's going to be any 3-1, even if he's the second choice in here, but he has not looked like the same horse he did earlier in his career since he came back. I mean, he ran okay last time, getting beat by Getter Number and Ginobili in a very strong allowance race, but he's still running the same speed figures and not quite even as good as he did in the San Felipe early in his 3-year-old season. He's facing lots of speed. He draws the inside. It just seems really hard for me for him to work out a trip. And the other one, the third choice on the morning line is Messier, the other Bob Baffert horse, a horse who ran on Breeders' Cup weekend and just bled really badly. And he's coming back on fairly short notice. He's another horse who's probably going to be a part of the pace from his inside draw. And frankly, I just don't want any parts of him. So I'm going to look for some closers in here to close out the exacta and toss those two out completely.
Yeah, and I assume the closers you're looking at might be the 4 Nakatomi and the 5 Hoist the Gold, and we're kind of on the same page here, Craig, especially Hoist the Gold, who I assume is one that you want to talk about. He's settled for a lot of minor awards, but this seems like the kind of race where he could again pick up second or third at a big price.
Yeah, he is one I definitely like. Nakatomi, not quite as much, but given his style, he could get in there. I think his last race is a little deceiving when he was able to win from more close up, but I think that was a slow-paced race. That was actually the same race that Messier was in. And I even want to use Strava a little bit, who has run pretty well from off the pace in the past. He was up on the front end in a slow-paced, sloppy route, but I don't think he's a horse who needs to be on the front. So I personally will be playing trifectas with those 3 underneath a Taiba.
Yeah, we're in agreement in this race. I'll have some exactas going with Hoist the Gold second and maybe trifectas with him in those second and third slots. But yeah, not trying too hard to beat Taiba in this Grade 1 Malibu. And we'll close out the Grade 1 action and this opening day Santa Anita card with race 11, the American Oaks. This one going the 1.25 mile distance for 3-year-old fillies. Craig, sometimes there have been some criticisms that this race isn't truly Grade 1 quality. I think as far as American Oaks go, maybe this isn't the best group of turf horses that's been assembled among the 3-year-olds this year, but it's a pretty solid competitive field. I mean, it's certainly a fun race to handicap, so I'll give it that. And unsurprisingly, Chad Brown has the favorite on the morning line. I mean, he always merits respect when he ships horses out to Southern California. And the number 9, Salima, while she hasn't faced this quality of competition yet, just seems like the kind of horse that might be improving at the right time.
Yeah, she might be. It's hard for me to get too excited about her. I know she gets Flavien Prat, which is certainly a positive, as we've talked about already. She is a little bit light on the speed figures. I want to say she's taking a big step up in class, moving to a Grade 1. That's a little bit debatable in a field like this, but there are some horses who have run faster than her, better than her, that I prefer to her because she just, I don't know, she feels like a second or third tier Chad Brown horse. He's just kind of taking a shot for me. So I wouldn't totally rule her out, but I'm going to look at a couple others. I'll start with the 5 Bell Street Birdie, a local horse last time for Mark Glatt. shipped in from England, coming out of some pretty weak races with a solid record. She was able to handle her first grade 3 pretty easily. The red carpet, won with a nice speed figure, actually just totally dominated that field. So of the others in here, I have another I want to talk about, but I'll start with her. She would probably be my top pick. I have more of a 1 and 1A, but curious what you think about Salima.
Yeah, I respect Salima. I think she can certainly win this race. She is a horse that had a pretty bad trip in her return from the layoff at Saratoga. I actually did her on my Horses to Watch show that I do on DRF's YouTube channel that day, and she came back and she's just gotten back into form in her 2 subsequent starts, and because she looked so impressive in her debut at Tampa going back to last winter. And I thought she beat a pretty good field last time in that Winter Memories. I mean, Candy Light is a grab motion horse who's been improving on the second half of the season, and I mean, she drew off to win that race by 3 lengths. And when you're a turf horse winning a race like that by open lengths, I mean, typically says you put in a pretty dominant performance. And the fact that Chad Brown has kind of anointed her as the one that he's going to target this grade 1 with, as opposed to anybody else in his barn when he certainly had others to consider for this race, seems like a pretty good sign. So I just feel like she's a horse that's going to run well here. Whether or not she offers value at 3-1, 7-2, I think that's for you to determine for yourself based on your opinion on some others in this race. I'll touch upon, before I get to my top pick, I'll touch upon the horse that you just mentioned, Craig, the number 5, Bell Street Bridie. I don't know what to make of her. Clearly, she's in good form right now. They bought her overseas for the U.S. equivalent of just over $300,000. Not quite as much as the $1 million they paid for the gelding that's running in race 1 on this card, which we're not talking about in much detail, but that's an interesting horse to look at if you want to check out some unusual PPs. But as for Bell Street Bridie, she got the distance last time, and I think that was really the key to her success, the 1 3/8, because she had targeted primarily longer distances overseas, races at 1 1/4 and beyond, and you could see that she really used her stamina to great effect last time, going for home a long way out and just kind of running the rest off her feet for the final 3 furlongs. And, turning back to the 1 1/4, it might not seem like a big difference cutting back 1 furlong, but it's just a different kind of race. Turn of foot is much more important. I don't think that, she's going to have the kind of advantage that she did last time. And also, while she did beat older horses in that red carpet, I thought that was a pretty weak group, and we've been talking about it all year. The older horse division in Southern California on the turf for the fillies and mares is just a pretty hungry bunch. The horse that was favored in that race, whose name is escaping me right now, she's just not very much horse. Sister O'Toole, she was the 9-5 favorite. So I don't want to put too much stock in the large margin of victory for Bell Street Bridie. I'm not going to be shocked when she does well, but I just preferred some others. And actually, the horse that I'm most interested in is the number 2, Sparkle Blue, coming in for Graham Motion, another East Coast shipper. She's getting a real class test here because it's fair to say she's faced weaker fields in her last couple of starts, both in the Virginia Oaks and last time in the Valley View, but I like the way that she's been improving with each start. I think she actually might have run the best race in the Virginia Oaks 2 back, because if you go back and watch that race, it was one that was dominated by closers, completely fell apart at the end, and she was the only horse that was involved in that pace that was still running on strongly at the wire after she took some bumps in upper stretch. And then last time, it was a much weaker field than this, and she got a great trip, but she was really powering away impressively on the stretch of that Valley View, and she strikes me as one that is going to relish this 1 1/4 distance. She is the younger half-sister to Share to Count, who for Graham Motion, I believe, was the Breeders' Cup filly and mare turf winner going back about 15 years. So she really does have the pedigree to love longer distances. And as I go through this field, a lot of the main contenders outside of she and Bell Street Bridie want to be coming from farther off the pace, and I think she's going to get the jump on a lot of horses under Joel Rosario, so she'd be my top pick in this race.
She was the other horse I was talking about. I like everything I saw about her in the Valley View. When I looked through the chart of that race, that 115 speed figure, which is part of an ascending pattern, which you want to see from a 3-year-old, is totally legit, as there's been several good performances out of there. Horses have run or matched the speed figure from that day coming out of it. So she's a horse I really like in here as well. I love her inside draw. I like that Joao Rosario comes with her. I know he's got some other mounts, but he sticks with this one, and I just think she has a lot of advantages in here. And I do think she'll fly under the radar a little bit, as I do think between the Chad Brown horse, between Bell Street Bridie, that there'll be some others taking money. The other horse I wanted to mention was the 6. Another one I guess Maizen Scene. Is one that I think ran fine in the Breeders' Cup. I mean, that was obviously a way, way, way tougher field than what she faces here. And even though her running line just looks kind of even, it was a very fast race. Tuesday ran a fast race. We know how good an Italian is. They are some serious fillies and mares that she faced in that race. And I don't want to totally dismiss her only getting beat by 6 lengths, because that could very well put her right in the mix here. The 120 speed figure she ran that day is actually better than anybody has in this field. So I think she's one with a shot as well. So for me, the 2, 5, 6, and 9 are horses I would use, and I would be leaning on the 2 and the 5.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Mise-en-Scène, because I feel like she is a horse that couldn't really put together a full campaign in Europe this year, but they brought her over to the Breeders' Cup like she might have just been coming into top form, and she ran one of her best races that day at a B6 against that tough field, as you noted, and feels like one that maybe is coming on at the right time at the end of the season, even though she's switching into a new barn to Brendan Walsh here. To me, she's pretty interesting, and she'd be the 3rd horse for me behind Sparkle Blue and Solima, and she figures to be the best price of those, so definitely want to include her, because like you were saying, I think Sparkle Blue could be a solid price in here, because there are horses that are going to take money that I personally don't want any part of, like the one Rhea Moon, who I thought beat a pretty suspect field last time in California, Skims, who just kind of got that race handed to her at Aqueduct. That was just a dream trip for her, and Pizza Bianca, who always takes some money. She just hasn't looked the same to me since her 2-year-old season, so I think if you can narrow this race down to some horses, you probably are going to get a decent price on them, because I feel like the money is going to be spread around in this race.
Yeah, that's a good point you make. I do think some of those horses are going to take money, and Rhea Moon she's just too slow on the TimeformUS speed figures. I haven't looked at others, but she's got several lengths to find to compete with some of these. Pizza Bianca, as you said, hasn't really done much since winning the Breeders' Cup as a juvenile. And Skims, she runs her best races on off tracks, I think. When you look at the TimeformUS turf ratings and the official track designation, she just doesn't seem to handle firm courses as well. And almost assuredly, that's what we're going to get at Santa Anita on Monday.
Well, that's all the handicapping for this Monday card at Santa Anita. Craig, before we wrap it up, let's go back and review the sequence. I think we can skip over the San Antonio, because I believe neither of us are that interested in playing the jackpot pick 6 wager, but the pick 5, I think it's an interesting ticket to put together. So I'll let you start. Just briefly talk through how you might go about a sequence like this.
Yeah, it's a race where I'm not going to try not to spread in some of these, because I think most of the races have multiple contenders. The first race, though, I will use at least 3 horses, the 8, the 9, and the 5. Big Beauty, the horse with the French name, who I'm still not going to try to pronounce. But I also like that 5 Lady Marianne, who we talked about, who I think might get a jump on some others and will really appreciate the hill. Race 8, we disagreed on the Baffert horses, but I do think we agree that the race does go through Bob Baffert. I'm going to use 3 of the horses, not the Calbred. I think the other ones look okay. And just depending on how much I look like I'm going to be spending on that ticket, I might go to the outside horse and use Awake at Midnight as well, but I'm going to be particularly leaning on the 1 horse and the 3 horse, Under the Stars and Ganadora. They would be my A's in here. The 9th race, it was one that I said originally looked like a spread race for me, but in the end, I'm just going to be leaning on 3 horses. Bataya, who was the other ones in here? I didn't make
ballet dancing.
Yes, that's the one. Ballet Dancing was another one, and I thought there was a third one. I'll have to go back and listen. You may have talked me into the 12 as well. Maybe that was it. Just one, I wasn't sure of the price, thinking maybe she'd get back, but from that 12 post, maybe not. The 10th, I'm not messing around with that one. I'm singling Taiba. If he doesn't win, I'll be out. I couldn't really make a case for any of the others. But as I said, it's a race I will definitely be interested in playing vertically, tossing out the 1 and the 2, and hoping to hit the try and the exacta with some of those closers, particularly the shipper in there, Hoist the Gold, the 5 horse. And then we just covered the American Oaks. Mentioned some of the horses I would be using. I would lean on Sparkle Blue, but I also like the 5 horse Bell Street Bridie and the 6 horse Myzian Scene.
Yeah, and I'll just briefly kind of rehash what Craig talked about. From my perspective, we have a very similar structure here, just a few different horses along the way. In the first leg, that 7th race, I would primarily use the 1, 5, 8, 9, and 11. That would be my biggest spread leg of the sequence, 5 horses, but I feel like they all have a good chance to win, and True Patriot is the one that I like the most, and if you're playing an ABC kind of ticket, she's the one that I would lean on a little bit there, hoping that she is not favored, that she's a decent enough price. In the 8th race, the La Brea, I like Under the Stars the best. I think that she is among the most likely winners, and she's probably not going to be the favorite in here. I would use her as well as the Logical Midnight Memories, and I think that one non-Baffert runner that Craig also mentioned, the number 8 Awake at Midnight, I think she's a horse that you can throw in here that should be a decent price, and I'd primarily try to survive this race with those 3. I really could not warm up to anybody else in the La Brea. In the 9th race, that allowance event, Craig, I think the horse that you were having trouble recalling was the number 8,
almost a factor.
Yeah. She'd be like a B or C type for me. I could use her. I like Ballet Dancing and the number 12 Karakatsi the most. They're the 2 shortest prices on the morning line, so I'm not really pointing out anything too clever here, but I just think this is a big field that you can narrow down a little bit, as Craig was saying, and I would narrow it down primarily to those 2 with a little bit of almost a factor, who figures to be a bigger price. And then the 10th race, Craig and I are in agreement, singling Taiba, and I'll close it out by leaning a little bit on Sparkle Blue, who I like the most and figures to be a nice price, with a little bit of Mise en Scène and Salim. I think that they both are viable contenders in the American Oaks. So that is a look at the pick 5 and pick 6 sequences that both end in that final race of the day at Santa Anita on Saturday. And Craig, felt pretty good to get back into the swing of things handicapping these races. We are going to take the next week off during this kind of holiday break, but we will be back in 2023 to resume our usual schedule of doing 2 podcasts a week, Pacecast and Forecast. So look for some of our first recap show. I think it would be January 3rd, maybe. I think that's a Tuesday, Craig.
Yeah, it sounds right. We would also probably maybe do some Eclipse talk then, because there probably won't be a whole lot to recap, but we can talk about that offline. But yeah, hard to believe we're going to be coming back in January and it's going to be time to start talking Derby prep races already.
Yeah, that's a good point. I keep forgetting I have to do my Eclipse Award ballot this week. I haven't really thought about it too much, but I'll wait until after this card takes place at Santa Anita on Monday. Maybe that might have a slight impact with Taiba running, so we'll see about all that. But Craig and I could talk about that in the new year. Everybody, thanks for listening to the podcast this week. Remember, you can always catch these TimeformUS podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Hope everybody has a happy holiday weekend and good luck on this Malibu card on Monday. See everybody in the new year.